The morning atmosphere inside the studio of The View felt strangely charged, even before the audience settled into their seats. Normally the show's energy was upbeat and predictable, a well-oiled machine of chatter, laughter, and debate, but today something hung in the air like static before a thunderstorm. Even the producers, usually brisk and confident, were darting around with a kind of anxious precision, as if anticipating a blowout they couldn't quite name but fully expected. Backstage, Tom Cruise stood relaxed, smiling politely as an assistant touched up his makeup. He carried himself with the unshakable confidence of someone who had spent decades under lights exactly like these. His composure only made the nerves around him more noticeable. Crew members spoke in hushed tones, watching him for cues, whispers drifting behind clipboards. He's in a good mood. Jane's already fired up. Just keep it moving, keep it light. They could hope. On stage, Jane Fonda adjusted the cuff of her blazer, her expression composed but unmistakably sharp. She had her cards already spread in her lap, neatly arranged, glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. She always prepared, scripts, research, lines of questioning, but today her focus seemed unusually intense. Even from a distance it was clear she had a point to make, and when Jane Fonda had a point to make, she made it. The producers noticed. The co-hosts noticed. Joy even muttered, "Well, this'll be fun," under her breath before cameras started rolling. As the music cue blasted through the speakers and Whoopi strode out with her easy, practiced wave to the crowd, the audience erupted in applause. The others followed close behind, all smiling brightly, though several smiles looked a little forced at the edges. When Tom Cruise finally stepped out from backstage, the energy in the studio snapped upward. The audience roared, some stood, others waved signs, and several people yelled, "We love you." Like teenagers at a concert, Tom flashed the dazzling grin that never failed him and shook hands down the line. But the moment he reached Jane, she offered only a polite nod. Not hostile, just cool. Controlled. It wasn't much, but enough for Tom to register it. His eyes flickered briefly, but the smile never broke. The show began the usual way, all warmth and laughter. They talked about Tom's new movie, the stunts, the training, the impossible physical feats he still insisted on performing himself. He was magnetic. Animated hands, enthusiastic explanations, charming modesty that didn't feel rehearsed even though it probably was. The crowd hung on every word, gasping and laughing at the right moments. Even Joy joked, "We get it, Tom, you don't age," earning a huge cheer. Everything seemed perfectly under control. But Jane had been quiet, too quiet. She held her cards, waiting, listening, calculating. And when Tom finished describing how he dangled from a helicopter over the Alps, she gave the slightest nod, like she'd found the moment she wanted. "So, Tom," she said, her tone calm but with a directness that sliced cleanly into the cheerful flow, "you've built your career on big, high-adrenaline action films. Spectacles, really, very impressive, but some critics argue that your movies glorify dangerous behavior, and that young people end up trying to emulate it. Do you ever think about the influence that has?" It happened instantly, a subtle, collective inhale across the table. Joy blinked quickly, turning slightly in her chair. Whoopi glanced toward the producer's desk with a tired, "Here we go" look. Even the audience reacted, murmuring and shifting. The question wasn't inappropriate, but it wasn't friendly either, and it definitely wasn't on the pre-interview notes. Tom's smile tightened just a fraction. "Well, Jane," he said evenly, "I think most people understand movies are entertainment. We're extremely careful. We have safety protocols, training, absolute professionals. I'm not encouraging anyone to jump off a building. But you do jump off buildings," Jane countered instantly. "You hang off planes. You do stunts that, frankly, look like suicide to the average viewer. Don't you think your brand of filmmaking sets an unrealistic and potentially dangerous example?" The murmur from the audience grew louder. A few people clapped. A few hissed. Everyone leaned in. Tom's jaw shifted almost imperceptibly. "I call it commitment," he said, leaning forward slightly. "Commitment to the craft, to storytelling. People appreciate authenticity." Or, Jane replied, lifting one eyebrow in a way that made several crew members wince, "It's spectacle. And spectacle is fine, but spectacle has consequences." Tom exhaled slowly. "I've spent my whole career working with the best stunt and safety teams in the world. Nothing I do is reckless." "From your perspective," Jane said. "Not from the perspective of the 13-year-old boy who climbs a roof because he saw you sprint across one." That landed like a dropped weight. The audience reacted, half gasps, half applause. Tom's smile faded. Jane, with respect, I'm not responsible for people misinterpreting entertainment as instruction. Adults know the difference. So do kids, with parents who talk to them. Jane's eyes narrowed, just slightly. You're avoiding the question. It's about accountability. Influence. You have global reach. And so do you, Tom said suddenly, and the temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Let's not pretend otherwise. Jane blinked. Excuse me. Tom leaned back, still calm but unmistakably firm. I make movies. You shape public opinion. The crowd went wild. Shouts, applause, cries of, ooh, vibrating through the entire studio. The co-host stared between them as if watching a tennis match on fast forward. Jane's chin lifted just a hair. Is that supposed to mean something? Tom didn't break eye contact. It means influence is influence. You questioned mine. I'm questioning yours. The producers began waving frantically behind the cameras, trying to cut to break early, but Whoopi was too stunned to transition smoothly. The moment the show returned from commercial, the atmosphere was buzzing so loudly it almost had a physical presence. The studio audience was wound tight, like an entire room of people holding their breath but grinning while they did it. The first segment had spread through the crowd like wildfire, and the whispers hadn't stopped during the break. Everyone knew they were watching something volatile, something that could blow wide open with the smallest spark. Whoopi tried to regain control the second cameras rolled. She put on her calm host smile, the one that usually smoothed turbulence before it turned into a storm. All right, she said, her voice measured but strained at the edges, we're back, we all got some water, we're breathing, and we're going to shift gears a little. But no one actually believed the gears were shifting. Least of all Jane Fonda. She was already leaning forward slightly, her expression cool but undeniably sharp. The break hadn't softened her mood. If anything, it had solidified her resolve. She was not walking away from the earlier clash without the last word. I want to clarify something before we move on, Jane said, slicing right through Whoopi's attempted reset. When Tom suggests that my activism somehow manipulates public opinion more dangerously than his stunt work influences impressionable viewers, he's oversimplifying my life's work. Drastically. A few audience members murmured in approval, others whispered nervously. Tom sat very still, hands folded, listening intently but with a stillness that was almost confrontational. I didn't say dangerously, Tom replied, tone polite but firm. I said significantly. There's a difference. Joy let out a half laugh, half groan and muttered, oh good grief, but neither of them looked at her. Jane pressed on. Tom, I've spent decades fighting for causes, real causes, that matter to millions. I don't do death-defying stunts. I don't jump from exploding helicopters. I stand up for human rights, for veterans, for policy reforms. And that's admirable, Tom said with a nod. Truly. It sounded sincere, but there was something in his voice, something subtle, that suggested the compliment wasn't neutral. But, Tom continued, when you question my influence and responsibility, you have to be willing to talk about your own. Influence doesn't just apply to entertainment. It applies to every platform. Jane's jaw tightened. Are you implying I misuse mine? I'm implying you have one, Tom said simply. And it doesn't make sense to pretend you don't. The audience reacted again, shifting, murmuring, a few claps breaking through before dying off. People were watching with the intensity normally reserved for courtroom dramas. Joy shuffled her cue cards loudly, whispering, oh my God, under her breath. Whoopi rubbed both temples like she was nursing a headache. Let me be very clear, Jane said, her voice lowering but gaining sharpness. If you believe that performing dangerous stunts is purely harmless entertainment, that's your prerogative. But don't sit there and compare that to activism, real activism, that attempts to create change. Tom didn't move. I'm not comparing the causes, Jane. I'm comparing the impact. Jane scoffed softly. Impact? You think your box office numbers and adrenaline-chasing stunts have the same weight as political advocacy? Tom leaned forward now, elbows on the table, the faintest edge entering his voice. I think millions of people watch my films. I think millions more follow your political messaging. And influence is influence. We both have it. The difference is, I don't deny mine. That hit harder than the audience expected. A wave of shocked gasps rippled across the room. Someone in the back yelled, ooh. Like this was a rap battle. Jane visibly stiffened, her knuckles whitening around the stack of note cards she held. I'm not denying anything, she said coolly. I'm asking you to acknowledge that your dangerous stunts have consequences. And I do acknowledge that, Tom said. I train. I prepare. I work with the best safety experts in the world. I've dedicated my entire life to mastering my craft. And that craft influences impressionable minds. And so does your activism, Tom snapped, but not loudly, more with precision. Everything we do does. That's the point I'm making. All right, Whoopi finally burst out, throwing both hands up. Enough. We're not doing this again. Tom is here to talk about his movie. We're not having a philosophical debate on air. Actually, Joy said, it's kind of interesting. Joy, Whoopi barked. Joy immediately sank back into her chair like a scolded schoolgirl. Jane wasn't finished. If he's going to question my activism, I have every right to ask why he refuses to take responsibility for the reckless example he sets. Tom turned toward her fully. I take responsibility for my work. Every day, every stunt, every scene, I do the research. I take the risks myself so no one else has to. I respect my audience enough to give them authenticity. Jane held his gaze. Authenticity isn't always the same as ethics. That line hit the table like a dropped anvil. Even Tom blinked, just once. Then he spoke, quietly, and using influence to steer public opinion isn't always neutral. Shouts, applause, gasps, everything erupted at once. The audience didn't even try to hide their reactions now. A few seconds of chaos passed before Whoopi all but shoved the show back on rails. Okay, please, we are done with this. Tom, tell us about the film. We don't have much time. Tom nodded smoothly, as if the temperature of the conversation had never risen. Of course, and that was the moment everyone noticed it, the shift. Tom was calm, controlled, composed. Jane, however, sat rigid, still trying to hold on to her earlier authority, but the momentum had turned. Completely. The audience felt it, the co-hosts felt it, even Jane felt it. Tom began discussing the movie with practiced enthusiasm, his co-stars, the stunt choreography, the emotional stakes. The audience was back on his side instantly, hanging on every word as if the earlier tension had evaporated.